I hope I don't block your view here. No. It's hard for me to stand still. So I'm going to be wandering around, and I hope it doesn't make it too hard on the video people. Thank you again, Ken, for a great bit of information on Swabhâva. Higher? Better? And again, thank all those that are doing the technical aspect and the video, et cetera, et cetera. It's a tremendous amount of work and effort. Thank you very much. So again, following up on Ken, Swabhâva and progressive evolution, gods, monads, egos, souls, and life atoms are atoms. So technically on the book, it said, or on the schedule, I should say, it left out egos and souls. In the secret doctrine, HBB talks just of gods, monads, and atoms. But GDP does add the other two on, which I think makes it more understandable as I hope we go along and can see the relationships. Because this also has, again, a great deal of relationships to the 7 principles. You can see the associations, as opposed to going just from monads to atoms, what happened to other parts of the 7 principles, etc. You will see them when you add the egos or egos and souls, etc. So again, what Ken already said, maybe from a little bit different angle. By the way, everything I have up here is from mainly G.D. Peruker, if I say so or not, if it's not mentioned or not. But I tend to be a little lazy and don't put the references down there. I'm sorry about that. But it is hopefully correctly taken from GDP correctly. And again, there's some other sources too I have, but mostly there. So again, Swab means self. Bu means to become. Again, self is the highest part of our hierarchy. It is Atman, if you wish, and we're going to look at a more detailed schedule of this, our diagram, which is in, by the way, the encyclopedic Theosophical glossary, which, if would you mind just holding that up, the brown book right there for me? Yeah, right, no, the other one right there. I don't know how many people have that. Yes. It's really not in that. That's just a folder for it. It's not, but it gives you some idea of the size of it. And this is not, as far as I know, in print, but you can download it through, I don't know if you have that in Netherlands, that you can download it, Herman, but I think Pasadena has it, that you can download the Theosophical, Encyclopedic Theosophical Glossary, which was never printed because they say, well, we don't have it all correct yet, which I can understand. It's a lot of detail, but you can get it, as far as I know, at no cost other than the paper. So anyway, looking at it a little more, it's the whole goal, the whole purpose of why we are here and so forth is to become, to bring out from ourselves this divine quality. What's so great about this divine quality? It's called perfect harmony, beauty, justice, law, and order. We can use our imaginations on this. Imagine how it would be wonderful this world would be if everybody acted in a very decent, honest, correct, loving way, where everybody was honest, everything that was said was honest, and again, having also the powers of the Buddha, which is a 6-rounder. For those who may not know, there are 7 rounds in our evolution. We're about halfway through, and well, I'm going to get into some of the timing on that towards the latter part of this talk for those who may be the first time or not. But the whole purpose is to have humanity, specifically us, but everything else is, of course, evolving, to live in this world, and this is our goal. This is our goal, and this is a wonderful, wonderful goal, and it makes me extremely optimistic to know that this is true. Yes, there's much pain and suffering, but that's the way it is, and all of us know we've made mistakes, but we've hopefully learned from them. And there's a lot of pain and suffering in this world, but there's a lot of beauty and harmony already here. Wonderful technology. Most people are good people, I have found. Most love their family, their friends. They want to do something decent in life. They want to make some kind of decent living, etc. So that makes me very optimistic, even though we're far from where our gold is. And it's, in many ways, wonderful right now, frankly. There's many wonderful things. Imagine what it's going to be when we reach that goal. Not only with the harmony that I mentioned, but all the powers, all the abilities to bring out these qualities of seeing the universe more clearly and directly. And using, I'll throw in a real, I love it. I was reading, and again, the questions that we all ask was G.D. Peruker, and he says, oh, by the way, when we've reached the 7th root race on this particular round, which is a matter of a few million years, we will be able to fly. What? Anyway, I of course, how are you going to prove that? Right? What are you doing? Okay, I understand if anybody's skeptical about that, and that's fine. But let's say it is true. Wouldn't that be fantastic? Okay, so anyway, the whole business is to bring that out, and every part of the universe is trying to do that. There's the big picture. So the monadic essences or gods are the head honchos or honchas, although of course they're sexless, but they're the ones that are behind this whole hierarchy, as was talked about earlier today by Hank. They're the ones that are leading everything, and everything comes from them. They start everything. And the next one down the line is the monads. And we're going to define all these things and try to be as clear as possible. And then the egos, then the souls, and finally the atoms. So that's pretty much the big picture. I don't think I'm telling anybody too much new except about the egos and souls. Some terminology, especially for, well, even if you don't have English as your native language, even with those with the native language of English, these are difficult terms. They are taken from Latin primarily. Emanation, which again has been talked about a number of times by Ken and others, technically again means from the Latin emanatus, meaning flowing forth or from. There's a very close similarity to the word evolution. Evolution, which again are praviti, is from the Latin evolutio, unfolding or opening, very similar sounding. And involution, navriti, is infolding. And yes, there's infolding and there's outfolding, if you will, or flowing out in all forms of evolution and growth and bringing out the Swabhâva, trying to bring out from that individual whatever quality it is, whatever level it is, always aiming towards the final goal, which is the self and the divine, etc. But emanation is more associated with, I'm sorry to block you here. Emanation is a more appropriate term of process by host of individual monads, which we will define in just a little while here, issue from their originate or parent source. So it's coming more, emanation is more in the context of coming from the origin, from the higher to the lower, so to speak, from the Atma, from the self to the monad, coming down and bringing out and bringing from itself. Whereas evolution is more after that has occurred from the higher to the lower. It's bringing out some subsequent unfolding of the Swabhâva, the bringing out from that particular entity. It's trying to approach the self at its level of evolution, if you will. In the word emanation is summed up by the doctrine of manifestation of worlds and living beings from a unitary divine source. So it tends to be coming from an originate. There's also the word which I did not put down here called radiate, or radiation, if you will. This is often used too. And radiate comes again from the Latin radiatus, which means ray. And it is more appropriate for the sun, which you think of as rays. And yes, the sun is producing life atoms. It is bringing out, it is emanating, but probably more so radiating these living entities, which again are trying to bring out their Swabhâva and to grow. By the way, please ask questions anywhere along the way. Don't wait until the end. Don't worry about that. Ask me anywhere along the way if you wish to ask questions or make a statement if it's appropriate. Yeah, we got one? Okay, good.
To make it clear, emanation, you work from the top and go down, right?
Yes, as a general rule, but not absolutely to that alone.
As
a general rule, it tends to be in that direction.
Okay.
As opposed to evolution, those
work
which
from the
are
bottom and
further
go
down
up.
try to bring out from themselves this achieving of the Swabhâva, to bring out the self, to start to bring out and elevate themselves to a higher level of consciousness and energy and matter.
Oh, maybe the word evolution, I maybe with the familiar, well, whatever. It doesn't work from the bottom and work its way up and evolve. That's why
it could be either way. Either way, it could.
That makes
it could be, but emanation tends to be from more above than below. So but again, it's not in concrete, it's not carved in stone.
Yeah, and even emanation could be almost simultaneous or maybe possibly work both
That's right.
directions.
It could also be used from the smaller to the and so forth. You could also use the word, but as a general rule, that is used. And it being a little particular here, but it is when you're dealing with philosophy and so forth. Try to be very careful the words you use. We do the best we can. And again, I will be defining a lot of these terms as we go along, which is a little bit tedious, but I think necessary when you come to things like egos and souls, which I think are vague in a lot of people's minds. So here we go. Just to throw in a little fly in the ointment, just to make it a little more confusing, and yet I think it might be interesting. Evolution is forward and backwards. Interesting statement. Again, the book, Questions We All Ask, there's 4 of these that GDP actually were talks he gave to the public. Came up with a variety of different subjects, and he said this, and I think it was the first or second book, and I hope somebody else has read this, so if I'm saying it's wrong, please correct me. But he said something to the effect that action, when it comes to evolution or action or movement or growing, brings about a reaction. And this may sound strange, and it did sound a little bit strange to me, and that's why I'm bringing it up. Not that I understand it totally, but that's, I'm learning here. I'm talking right now, but I'm very much of a student, and I'm hoping maybe it'll be more clear to me too. But there's a tendency when you do act in a certain direction that there's a reaction. That this tends to be the way of evolution. We talked about earlier today, for instance, you bring out a subject which is not popular for the public, and yet it's 100% true. There's a reaction to it. You move forward, but then you're pushed backwards. You're changing everything in the universe you do and say, etc., is affecting the universe. And it's used to a certain pattern, for a while anyway. And when you move in a certain direction, it automatically kind of, well, okay, we're not, it kind of reacts. It's the old yin and yang as opposed to yang. I like yang better. It's the positive and the negative forces of nature, the so forth and so on. If we do move in certain directions, expect that there's a certain push backwards too. So again, the spiral of evolution, There's a movement forward, but there's movement backwards. I will leave it at that. I won't get into any more specifics, just to throw it into the equation. And again, anybody has any comments or questions or can educate me on this, I'm more than happy to hear it any time now or whenever. But I think that has to be put in the picture and thought about a little bit. That there's always a reaction on anything you do, especially if it's of anything significant and spiritual, etc. So, I love again GDP. he was like, okay, well, how do you define a God? He says, well, it's a monadic essence. And he purposely says, and wrote it down, listen, I'm keeping this as vague and as possible because when you get into areas like this, it's so far, it's really beyond our comprehension of not understanding. And to try to pinpoint it and say, okay, a God's this, that, and the other thing is very dangerous, so to speak. Or you easily can make a mistake. So he left it very vague and said monadic essences. And we'll define what a monad is in just a second. And essence, of course, means from the Latin, esse means to be, B-E. And again, very vague, very general. It's the beginning, it's the highest, and this and that, and was specifically very vague about it. But he said, essentially, monadic essence, virtually equivalent to the God, there being as many gods as there are monads. HBB alludes in the secret doctrine to the three fundamental bases of consciousness, basic structural framework of the universe. She speaks of gods, monads, and atoms, a trichotomy which reminds us of the familiar trichotomy elsewhere alluded to as spirit, soul, and body, as Ken said. The spirit corresponding to God, monad corresponding to the soul, and atom here responding to the body. So what is a monad? A monad is a spiritual entity which to us humans is indivisible. Again, coming from either Greek or Latin, mono means one. Mono means one. It's indivisible. It is a spiritual divine, a divine spiritual life atom. So there's a direct relationship to the divine, which is the highest. It's coming directly from the divine, or I should say, it can come directly from the divine. Originally it does, of course. But indivisible because its essential characteristics as we humans conceive it is homogeneity, which, while that of the physical atom above which our consciousness soars is divisible and is a compositive, heterogeneous particle. It's a composite. Monads are one and indivisible. They're not composites like a human being and all the principles, et cetera, et cetera. Monads are eternal, unitary, again one, individual, life centers, consciousness centers, deathless during any solar manvantara. And towards the end of this talk, we're going to get some specifics on how long is a solar manvantara. I have a feeling that a lot of people don't know what that is, but that's another story. It's a long time. Almost seems like eternity. Okay, therefore ageless, unborn, and undying. Consequently, each one is such, and their number is infinite. Is the center of the all, for the divine in the all is that which has its center everywhere and its circumference and limiting boundary nowhere. Now we're getting into an area which I think is not as well known by various people in theosophy in this context. Ego, again, comes from the Latin ego or ego, meaning one, or I, meaning I. I am, and so forth, I. So, the ego in this context is the accumulated or stored up or treasured fund of conscious evolutionary experience, gained during the continuously succeeding and repetitive embodiments of a monad in the manifested worlds. Thus, as an illustration, and taking HBB's term, the reincarnating ego is the gatherer, and indeed itself is the storehouse of all the spiritual, intellectual experiences gained by the human monad in and through its many different incarnations and embodiments in the worlds of manifestation. Ego, right away, has the association mainly with manas, the mind, the intellect. And yes, there's a spiritual aspect because it comes from the monad. But there's always, with the ego, you think more of the intellect and mind and the storehouse of all the incarnations. With every monad, whichever monad is associated with. Now, soul, here's the one that catches a lot of people. This is used all over the world. You know, it's used here and there, and it's soul and that soul and every other soul. But again, I like GDP's definition, which you may or may not agree with, and that's fine. But I think, again, the key word is, I think Ken also said, is vehicle. And it was said a few other times. Vehicle. It's a vehicle. A soul is a vehicle. But in this context specifically is the way GDP does it. The soul is a sentient, sensitive, living vehicle or garment or veil. Itself a living substance with which the ego surrounds itself during any embodiment. Another name for the soul is body. Not necessarily a body of flesh and bones, but any garment or veil or vehicle in and through which and on whatever plane of the human constitution an ego may be expressing itself. Hence, we see the common usage so favored by GDP in his writings of the various terms spiritual ego, human ego, spiritual soul, human soul, animal soul, and even physical soul. And the latter means your body. Your body is considered the physical soul of, and we will see that picture. It's a vehicle for a more refined state of consciousness above us. And finally, life atoms, which was again talked about a few times, and we'll give a little more detail about. The soul emanates as well as the monads, etc. Life atoms, which are the vital ensouling power or vital entity, meaning a substance or entity, entified unit in every primary or ultimate physical particle. Itself a vital quasi, that means like or similar consciousness, conscious individualized vehicle of the spiritual monad or highest consciousness center. It is a vehicle for the monad. A life atom is not the physical atom of science, which is but the vehicle, or garment of the former. In other words, the physical atom is a vehicle for the life atom. It's lower than the life atom. Compounded of physical and physical astral matter only. That's the, again, encyclopedic Theosophical glossary, which I pointed out. That's where I got that information. Life atoms belong to each of the 7 principles of a human. Each of them. So here's a little summary. Thus, from the above statements, the essential divine spiritual stuff, or essence, or substance, which itself a God, when expressing itself as an individual on the next inferior plane we call a monad. So it again is the vehicle of the highest self of a God, if you will, needs this vehicle, this soul, if you will, to perform on the next plane lower than it. Again, it was said by Josh that electricity has to be brought down and so forth and so on to bring into the houses, etc., from the plant. So this is this is what we're doing with the different type of vehicles here. A monad, such monad expresses itself on the plane of which it may be manifesting through its appropriate spiritual, intellectual, monastic veil or garment or egoic focus, which is the ego. So the next one down is the ego. That's which the monad uses to go to the next plane. Because it cannot function on that plane. It doesn't have a consciousness, a matter or substance that will form or will be able to work on that plane. Its ego, and each such ego, as above stated, in its turn surrounds itself with its own swabhavically characteristic veil, vital garment or veil, or living substance, or sensitive stuff, soul. Now, here we again see the principles coming into play. We talked about the ego being more associated with the monastic principle. So where do you think the soul, which principle do you think the soul will be with what I just said? Which principle would it be associated with? The comic principle, the one is sensitivity, the astral comic, the astral area, which is associated with the element water especially, the sensitivity aspect. You have to be sensitive to the environment. The ego is mainly bringing in the intellectual aspect and putting it together in order and like a mind or manas aspect. But you've got to have the sensitivity, the feeling, you know? You don't have the sensitivity for your surroundings, how are you going to get the music of sound? You have to be sensitive to the environment. And that's why the soul is so important in all the planes. And the soul emanates the life atom on the appropriate plane. So here's the easy picture. I want you to all memorize this. Okay, I know this is very complicated. I'm going to try to not get you too tired and tedious about going through some of this, but we need to go through some of it, give you the picture. You have to know some of these details, at least have them in mind. And again, you can find this information in GDP's books. I know the encyclopedic glossary has this all in it too. So getting down to specifics, you always start from the very above this is called the para-atman. Para-atman, P-A-R-A, atman. Para means above. And it's even higher planes of divine aspects. But it starts on this particular hierarchy with the highest being the monadic essence, as I said. GDP will use this word because you can't really define it. It's so vague. And he wanted it to be vague because we can't understand it, but at least we get the general idea. And they call that the monadic essence again, divine monad. And the next one down, interestingly enough, is cosmic Iswara. Who knows what Iswara means? Ah? Very good. I knew you'd get it. Thank you, John. Lord. So here's a fancy one for you. And again, I know this is technical and tedious, I hope you're not too tired. But, yeah, as John said very clearly, it means Lord. It is from is in the Sanskrit, means Lord or to rule. It is frequently applied in Hindu mythology not only to cosmic divinities, and again, we're dealing with the very top here, but to the expression of the cosmic spirit in the human being. So this is more the cosmic spirit in the human being, but also when you're dealing with the cosmos with a K, it's of course dealing in an even larger area. Consequently, when the reference is had to the individual human being, which we are mainly dealing with here, Iswara is the divine individualized spirit in man. Man's own personal God. The divine ego or child of the divine monad. The divine ego or divine child. Remember, see below, it says above it, divine ego. And what does ego mean? When you think of ego, what's the next thing that comes across your mind? Mind. So, again, the monad, the spiritual divine essence and center, and then in order for it to go on the next plane, it needs to have the ego. And this goes for the upper as well as the, whoops, I pressed the wrong one. Oh boy, I turned it off. Okay, boy, that's good karma. Knowing me with technology, and I did it just that fast, in the middle of, everybody, that's good karma. So, so anyway, you get more the intellectual aspect. Of course, when you're talking about a plane like this, it's way beyond our comprehension, but you get the general idea. It's dealing more with the intellectual aspect. Okay, find it, where are we? The divine ego or child of the divine, okay. It is this view that could also have reference to the Dhyani Buddha or to the immanent Christ in man. So it's in this context as a human being that they're in this level of consciousness at that time. In the Hindu pantheon, the title is frequently used, given to Shiva, but also the others. Again, the occult glossary on that one. Okay, let's go back. The divine soul. The soul deals with what? What's the one word you would use for the soul? Physical? Vehicle, correct. But as far as, yeah, I did not make that clear. In the context of sensitivity also. I'm sorry I didn't make that clear. This makes it more sensitive to the environment. It concentrates more on the sensitivity aspect. And it's called the monadic envelope, which goes by another name you more commonly know is Auric egg, Auric envelope, Auric egg, Auric envelope. And this is one which I don't think is clearly understood very well in Theosophy about the real auric envelope. Of course, people talk about aura, but we're talking, this of course has different levels. We're talking about the big fancy one. This is the big E. So, aura is from the Greek or Latin. Both of them mean air. The English air. Auric egg is the source of the human aura, taking its name from its shape, the oval shape. It ranges from the divine to the astrophysical and is the seat of all the monadic, spiritual, intellectual, mental, passional, vital energies and faculties. In its essence, it is eternal and endures throughout the pralayas as well as the Manvantaras. So the Auric egg is really the Atman. They say, well, okay, the Atman is this or Atman is that. The Atman is your Auric egg, is what he's saying. Now, it's not just, again, the lower principles. It goes through all of them. We're thinking mainly of the body here and the astral. But the Auric egg includes everything. It is the highest part of the human being. And again, it's dealing with the sentient, the feeling part. Yes, it has, again, above it, the Iswara and the monadic essence. But to us, it's about encompassing of everything and as divine as anything you could really picture. Okay. So then you have your spiritual monad, or ray, monadic ray. Again, as I talked about emanation and ray. You use more the ray in this context because what's the main thing that we see that reminds us of a divinity? Something you see every day. Light? The sun. The sun. Yeah, which we know is, the sun is really part of the divine, but it's the lower part actually. The divine, like humans, and all the universe has 7 different levels or planes or whatever. It's the lower aspect of it, but believe me, I don't think Hollywood's gotten anywhere near the magnificence of our sun. And I swear, I mean, yes, it's just the vehicle. It's the lower part of the sun. But I'll tell you, it is magnificent. And there's nothing that even gets near it on this earth, Hollywood or otherwise. Even Hollywood can't do that. So the ray, the highest divine, and the symbol for the sun is always associated with the divine, and as we know, there are divine entities in it. So this, in this context, is more, and because the sun is glowing all over the place, emanation is not really a good picture. As Dara has told me a few times, it's the ray that should be used. Right, Dara?
Transaction notes of her later years, she said she had really hoped to use the word radiation rather than emanation, but the radiation is the first step as that ray comes in. And as far as the auric egg, if it's my understanding, that's in the higher portion of the auric egg. Is that right?
Yeah, when it's so much going out in all directions like that, it's not really the best word to use to emanate. Technically, it is an emanation, it's a flowing outward, but this is all directions, and it's a much better word is to use a ray. As you were saying, okay, emanate and this and that, and you could say evolution and so forth. But when you're dealing with such a large thing, a ray is a better subject. Okay, so you have the spiritual monad, then the individuality of the spiritual ego, the individuality, and then the spiritual soul. This is the Buddhic part. And then on the left side, as again Ken brought out clearly, Atman means the self, the high self, the divine self. And you can see on that left side, it is using the vehicles of the monads in those particular areas. Remember, the Atmic, the Buddhic, the monastic, higher and lower. Again, Bruker tends to kind of push prana aside as a principle because it's so all-encompassing, it's not specific to the human. So he kind of drops that out and puts the upper and lower manas as principles. So don't let that throw you, and again, you may not like that, but that's what he does. But the Atman, the Jivatman, the Bhutatman, the Pranatman, these are the divine areas. And their vehicles are the monads to the right. And then the monads use the egos, and the egos use the souls. So you see the order of it and discipline of it. And hopefully makes it not so confusing. So, Atman deals with the very highest, Jivatman with the Buddhic, and the inner God contains both the divine and the spiritual. And then the spiritual soul emanates to the monastic or chain monad, higher human monad, the higher human ego, higher human soul, etc. I'll just pretty much go down the line and say them. And anybody have any particular questions? I know, again, this is a little tedious, but I think we should at least say them. And I'll be happy to explain anything I can, which is a big question. Okay? So you see that? The psychic or lower monastic, part of the Brahmanatman, and Bhutatman does deal with what has been. Bhuta means has been. I might just add, so it's been brought over from other lifetimes. Pranatman means energy, prana. Jivatman, jiva also kind of means energy. So just where some of those words came from. But you see it keeps going down, the psychic monad, which is a lower human monad, which is where we are, not in that monad, frankly. We're in the lower human ego, or the human soul, which is man. And deals with the sentient, the ego. The human ego is where most of our mind ends, the lower human ego. And then the lower desires, et cetera, of the mind, or sensitivity of the mind, the human monastic principle, is where we are mainly. That's most. And then you go to the beast monad, or the animal monad, which has its beast ego, or the elementary ego. Dealing again to the right there, the kama, which deals with the passional and desire, and which again can be higher and lower, but the lower is, of course, what we're mostly worried about. And then the vital astral is elementary, is the soul. And from this, the astrophysical monad, which is dealing more with the linga sharira, which means the astral body, the stula sharira, the physical body. And it comes down, each time lowering the energy, like, again, an electric plant, that's what it has to do that. But each one needs the spiritual divine monad, and then you have at the very lowest, the elementary ego. I hope you can see that, by the way, in the back. You can see those okay? I hope, I'm sorry, I couldn't make this in one slide and make it big enough. So anyway, yeah, it'd probably be good for me to do this. The elemental soul, the elementary ego, the soul, and the physical body. Basically dealing with the astral, and that's what we're mainly doing. The sensitivity that we have with our nerves and our muscles and all this certainly are physical, but there's a very much of inner blending. You cannot separate the astral from the physical. And again, when people talk about their mind and their intellect, yes, they're talking, of course, about the brain, but it's not the brain that does most, in my opinion, more the higher philosophical and other things. It deals more with the nerves and the nervous system, obviously very closely related. But it comes with thinking of the mind. It's more the astral monastic or monad, astrophysical monad, that's probably dealing with most of our mental function, which we do not see. But I don't know, I use my imagination, and I swear, I just cannot, I'm sorry to be so disrespectful to human anatomy, but I cannot see this mush coming up with Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. I'm sorry. has anyone ever dissected a cell from the brain and found a thought there? Has anyone ever done that? Where are all these thoughts coming from? Yes, think of it more as the human brain as a soul, a vehicle for the mind, like a computer and a radio is a vehicle for the center that's sending out the information. It is absolutely necessary. You cannot see anything without this computer. But this computer is not coming up with, if it's on a video or something, from someplace else. So I throw that out there, and you can agree or not agree. That's my thoughts. It's, to me, proof. Just, they can't see any thoughts in there. Yes, it affects it, just like if you turn off your radio or whatever, you have a stroke, you're going to lose part of your functioning. But this is like, getting a bad battery on the thingamajig, on your radio or whatever. It's not where the station is coming from. I don't know if you agree or not. That's my opinion. Oh, there we go. So here's some interesting information. Let's get specific. What area does the monad, divine monad, where is its consciousness? It's the galaxy, specifically. Oh yes, it can do beyond that, but its main area is the galaxy. And how many suns are in our galaxy? I told somebody that a couple of times.
100 billion.
All right. 100 billion suns in our galaxy. So that's a lot of suns. If you put 10 planets for each sun, you're talking about 1 trillion planets, 1,000 billion planets. Our galaxy is 100,000 light years in diameter, at the speed of light for 100,000 years. So that's a big area. That's the consciousness of the divine monad. Spiritual monad is the solar system, or the Buddhic, if you will. The Buddhic principle, it's the solar system. And the reincarnating monad is the chain monad, or higher human monad. It's a chain monad, is the re-embodying. And again, hopefully those will know who may be new to Theosophy. There are thought to be 6 other planets at least that are not visible to us associated with the Earth. You say, well, how can you prove that? I can't. I can't. But I know people that I respect that have seen these and have had what's called initiation and brought back this information. They're the ones that came behind this movement called Theosophy. And you can say, well, they can't show it to me. And you perfectly have the right to say, I don't believe it. Again, we talked about dogma and hypothesis. This is, as far as the average person, this is hypothesis. To me, it's true. Because I respect the people that say it. I know these people that say it. I know they would not lie about something like this. I know their life, their character. They would not say something like this unless they knew it. And there are those which they call through initiation who leave this physical body and go into other parts of our solar system and can see and have direct experience. Again, how can you prove that? Well, proof is a relative term. So I love GDP on this one too. You must have read about that. It says proof is not necessarily, what was one man's proof is not necessarily another man's proof. The real core of what you feel is true is what you feel in your heart. And again, some people cannot see certain types of truth. And that's the way it is. But you hopefully will find out by experience when you feel it deeply that as time goes on, you are correct, even though you may not be able to prove it totally logically. But that's another story. The higher human monad is the global chain. And again, as I said, the psychic part of us monad deals with just this globe. and has its consciousness in this globe. And here's something that somebody brought up a little earlier. Can you see that, John? I hope that I have that accurate. I just, John, for those hopefully that were able to hear his talk, he talked about this, about certain types of meditation, etc., and he associated, again, the body and the feelings, the linga, the astral, the kama manas, the buddhi, and so forth, the things we've been talking about, to try to think about them and realize what their context is, realize what this body really is. It has some very good qualities, but it's also very inferior to the higher part of a human being. To really think about that. And then what the part of the sensitivity of the astral, the emotions, and whether you're really terribly selfish or you're thinking about other people. You're trying to improve your selfishness, which we, of course, all have. And then the higher states of consciousness like we've been talking about. I just bring it up, taking it from John, just to throw it in this context as a way of perhaps looking at this more. And for those that had the opportunity to hear him, then there was other more specific aspects to this, but I won't get into that now. Okay, now for the good stuff. I couldn't resist. I like to see things as much as possible where you can put your finger on it. That's why I like to know how many suns are in our galaxy. And, you know, it's nice to think philosophically and so forth. It's very important and absolutely necessary, but at times I like to put my finger on things. So we're going to give you some numbers. Day and nights of Brahma. Now, what does that mean? Okay. Each day of Brahma is 4,320,000,000 years. Earth years, that is. And this is the 7 rounds of the Earth Manvantara. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I've heard that in many different ways, but that's the way I pronounce it. A Manvantara literally means between antra, 2 manus, M-A-N-U. A manu is a generic or general sense for the race or civilization that starts at the beginning of an evolutionary period to the end of the evolutionary period. This is called a manvantara. As I mentioned to you, there's thought to be 7 globes with our Earth, 6 of which we do not see. We are 3.5 rounds through this. At least this is what has been said in the Secret Doctrine, among others. We are halfway through, a little past half. And it takes 4,320,000,000 years to go through all 4 globes. We're halfway through, a little more. Yes?
One little hint, you still have 5 earthly minutes.
Oh.
But in a certain way,
So
we can give you a few earthly minutes more.
Oh, okay. I got the answer for that one. What I like to do is use Ojai minutes. Yes. And Ojai is the town I live in, which is about 8,000 people, and we go a lot slower there. So it may be more than 5 minutes by San Diego time. I just want to clue you to that. Anyway, so this is a little bit complicated, and I could anyway. The bottom line is that to give you some kind of idea of how long evolution is on our particular planet, we're halfway through. And I'm going to go through this really quickly because there's one thing I got to give you at the end here, which I know you're going to love. Anyway, let me get this. Whoops. upside down. The solar system, the sun, is also, of course, evolving, etc. And there are approximately 36,000 where are we? 36,000 days and nights of Earth during, or 36,000 manvantras, Earth manvantras, in the cycle of the sun. Okay, don't worry about all the little numbers. I'm just kind of giving you a big picture here. We're halfway through the solar manvantara, the beginning of the sun and the end of the sun. We're halfway through. So we have had approximately 18,000 Earth manvantras, and I use this, quotation marks. We've been on 18,000 different planetary rounds already. We're just in the last one out of 18,000. I throw that out there. And again, I know this is very technical and I'm not going through all the details, but I just wanted to let your imagination soar a little bit. What were we, by the way, 18,000 globes ago, globe around? Because we just became human at the end of the lunar chain. I just throw it out there. My imagination just soars on that. We were a little life atoms somewhere running around. I don't know. But here's one I think you'll like. I got to end with this. Give you some picture of how huge the universe is and how small it is. In the book, The Romance of Chemistry by William Foster, professor of chemistry at Princeton University, he states, it has been computed that 1 cubic centimeter, 1 cc, 1 milliliter, less than a small thimble of gas, say oxygen, at standard temperature and pressure, contains approximately 27 quintillion molecules. That's how many molecules are in that. This one I like. W.R. Whitney of General Electric Company has calculated that if the molecules in a glass of water could each be changed, each molecule changed to 1 grain of sea sand. 1 grain, if each molecule was 1 grain of sea sand, the sand thus produced would be sufficient to cover the whole of the United States in the depth of 100 feet. Thank you very much.